Have you ever stayed quiet in a conversation and told yourself you were just being the bigger person? That you were picking your battles, keeping the peace, being sensible about it? Because from the inside, that is exactly what it feels like. Not silence or avoidance, just a reasonable decision not to make things worse. You noticed something was off, maybe someone said something dismissive, or a situation seemed unfair. Then the calculation began. If I say something now, I become the one who turned this into a problem. I become the one who made it awkward. So you let it go, and letting it go felt in that moment like the right thing to do. The thing you held back is still there though. And the choice to say nothing was not as neutral as it seemed, because the discomfort did not disappear when you decided not to speak. It just moved inward. Most women who struggle to speak up are not struggling because they've nothing to say. They're struggling because saying it feels like starting something. It feels like picking a fight. And when silence feels like the more mature option, it stops being something you question because you think it's wisdom, which is why it's a problem, because it isn't always the smart decision. Hi, I'm Helen Innes, and I help women stop holding back and start speaking up. This video is part of my series, Why You Hold Yourself Back from Speaking, where I explore what is actually driving the silence and what it would take to change it. Today I'm going to talk about why speaking up can feel like picking a fight, even when what you want to say is calm, fair, and completely reasonable. The feeling that speaking up will cause trouble comes from the times where you said something honest and the room shifted in a way that cost you something. You might have been a child who said, "That hurt my feelings," and instead of being held or reassured, the adult in front of you got impatient and told you were too sensitive. You learned that not only were your feelings inconvenient, but that naming them had a negative consequence. Later, the same dynamic played out in different situations. You told your partner you needed more help, and rather than a conversation bringing you closer, he got quiet, sulked, behaved as though you had accused him of something. At work, you flagged the deadline was not realistic, and instead of that being heard as useful, your manager treated you as someone being difficult. Each time you concluded that saying something changes the atmosphere, and that change has a cost. Your body remembers it not as an idea, but as a rule. And rules you built in the past show up later in situations that are very different from the original circumstances which created them. One of the reasons this pattern is hard to catch is that a lot of the silencing happens before anyone else has said a word. Something happens, a friend interrupts you again, your boss drops something on your desk at 5 o'clock on a Friday, your partner makes another remark that lands badly, and you feel it immediately. But then the rule kicks in to prevent you from saying anything. You start negotiating with yourself, telling yourself it's nothing, and if you bring it up, you'll just make the atmosphere worse. You justify the behavior, so it starts to feel less of an issue than it did when you first noticed it. So you see here, it's not that silence is necessarily something other people have pushed on you. You've learned to do it a lot to yourself before anyone else gets involved. When speaking up feels like picking a fight, the obvious assumption is that what you are afraid of is conflict. But for a lot of women, it goes one layer deeper than that. It's not just the argument they're afraid of, it's becoming the kind of woman who starts one. And that's a very different fear entirely. You can be completely clear what you want to say, and it can be fair, and you can still feel a strong pull towards not saying it, because you don't want to be the woman who's difficult. If your sense of safety has been built around being easy to be with, then saying something threatens more than one conversation. It threatens the version of you that has kept you included, liked, and loved. Suppose your sister borrows something, brings it back damaged, and says nothing about it. You feel irritated, but then immediately another thought arrives. Do I really want to be the kind of person who makes a thing of this? The question is no longer about the damaged item. It's about who you become the moment you name that it matters to you. The concern around speaking up at work is usually that being honest will change how you're perceived, and people will think of you differently. Imagine your manager tells you he needs something by tomorrow morning. You know it's not possible without something else being dropped. You could say, if this becomes the priority, something else has to move. That is a straightforward, reasonable thing to say. But if part of you believes it will read as uncooperative or as evidence that you can't do your job, it stops feeling like good judgment and starts feeling like it says something bad about you. This is why the same woman can be completely open with one manager. One boss hears a challenge and says, "Good point, let's look at it differently." Another makes her feel like her honesty is unwelcome. She's not misreading the situation. She is accurately tracking what happens to her when she speaks up with a particular person, and she's adapting accordingly. The problem is when caution becomes her default. Every new person has to prove themselves before she'll speak honestly with them. In an intimate relationship, the fear tends to be less around how we're seen in the moment and more about what comes next. Perhaps you want to say to your partner, "When you make jokes about me in front of people, I feel humiliated." The sentence is calm, true, and not intended as an attack. But before you say anything, you already know what will happen. He'll go cold, the atmosphere will feel tense, and by bedtime you'll not be speaking, and things the next morning will be off. You've seen this play out enough times that staying quiet feels less like giving up and more like a practical decision to not set the whole thing in motion again. Because you bringing things up like this doesn't seem to change anything anyway. Speaking up can feel like picking a fight even when the words themselves are calm and fair. Because you're not just thinking about what you want to say, you're thinking about everything that comes after it. Family tends to carry the most weight because it comes with a longer history and older roles, and because speaking up in a family system rarely feels like a conversation with just one person. Say you want to tell your mum, "I'm not okay with how you speak to me." On paper, one sentence, one person. But you may already know exactly how it will unfold. She'll call your sister and she'll say she doesn't know what's got into you. Your sister will message you to say that mum is really upset. By the end of the day, you're not dealing with the original conversation anymore. You're becoming the problem to the whole family. Sometimes being silent in a family feels like the right thing to do, and that is what makes it so hard to question. You say nothing to your mother-in-law not because nothing is wrong, but because you don't want the fallout reaching your husband or your children. Staying quiet feels like shielding the people you love from the consequences of your honesty. It feels selfless. Most women who hold back assume that speaking up creates conflict. But there's an important difference between creating conflict and revealing it. Picture a relationship where a husband makes small, cutting remarks on a regular basis. Nothing is ever said. From the outside, the relationship looks fine. Then one day, the wife says, "You keep talking to me as though I'm stupid and I'm not okay with that." He reacts badly, and suddenly it looks as though her words are what caused the problem. But the problem was already there. It was there in every remark that went unchallenged. What changed when she spoke wasn't whether a problem existed. What changed was who was holding it. Before she said anything, she was carrying it alone. After she spoke, it was between them, where it had always belonged. Silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was just keeping the discomfort inside one person. Staying quiet doesn't make things go away, which is why continually doing it is so draining over time. You still feel the hurt. You still register the unfairness. You still know what happened. The conflict doesn't dissolve because you choose not to say something. It just stays inside and becomes something you carry privately. Part of you is saying this isn't okay. Another part is saying don't bring it up. You live with both of those parts all at once, and over time that turns into resentment. The choice in front of you is rarely between conflict and no conflict. It's between a tension that is out in the open and a pressure building inside. Choosing not to speak is sometimes exactly the right call. The person may not be safe. Timing may genuinely matter. Some things would be made meaningfully worse by speaking up at that time. But there is a difference between choosing not to speak and just not speaking. One is a decision you're actually making. The other is a habit that has been running so long that you've stopped noticing it's there. The problem isn't the silence itself. It's when you lose track of whether you choose it. Most women who hold back have stopped imagining that speaking up could ever feel different. It's not that they're waiting to feel ready. They don't believe ready is coming. But change doesn't start with feeling ready. It starts with doing it anyway, and then having to sit with how uncomfortable that feels. What tends to happen first is an awkward in-between. You say the thing to your partner and then spend the next hour feeling guilty because he's upset. You push back on something at work and replay the whole exchange that evening, picking it apart, wondering if you went too far. You say something more honest with your family and still feel that familiar pull to soften it. That discomfort is not a sign that something went wrong. It's what the process actually feels like. You don't go from silence to speaking with ease. You go from believing that saying something will make everything worse to being willing to say it even when part of you still thinks it might make it worse. And from understanding that whatever tension follows was not created by your honesty. It was already there. You were just carrying it alone. If this is resonating and you want to understand more about what makes speaking up harder in specific situations, I suggest you check out the video I have about what makes speaking up harder when it actually matters. I'll link it below in the description.